Our series exploring the darkness and light of Wraith 20th Anniversary Edition continues.
This should be a very short installment because our focus, Chapter 5, Traits, is mainly a repository of information that you're going to need when building your character. This is something that you will learn, this is something you will directly reference, but the more familiar you become with the game, the less you're going to find that you'll go to this chapter. When you're doing character creation, you'll either do that straight from memory, or you'll go to Chapter 4. The other essential part of character creation is Chapter 6, the Shadow, but that's still in our future. So what do we find in Chapter 5? Well, it says pretty clearly, in Wraith, character traits are deliberately left broad and open to interpretation, and this is a very, very important rule. You do need to keep in mind the rating in a trait to reflect how important that is to the character, or how capable they are, or how much time they've spent learning it. But what exactly it covers needs to be quite broad. So it opens up with that description and then moves into telling us about specialties. These are for particularly high traits that you have. Anything of 4 or higher is going to be tagged with a specialty. All right. Then it sidesteps into the basic abilities of any Wraith. Right? These are life sight, death sight, heightened senses, and the condition of insubstantiality. So it's very important to get a good grip on what these things mean and how they are used in play, how often they are used, and what they actually allow, and a culture where every member of the society manifests these abilities. What would they be like? Right? These are very important traits, and I think they really should have been mentioned earlier. But this is a great place to have them, because when you're looking for what can my Wraith do, this is the chapter to which you go. So, page counts are important. We slip over into archetypes next. These are all the personality aspects. When I mentioned in the Chapter 4 video about nature and demeanor, it is from these things that they are drawn, and you're creating a framework for personality to build on, where you'll have 2 of these. And these will determine exactly how or what your willpower is based in and how it can be restored. All right. So we have things like the activist, the architect, the bravo, the bureaucrat. These are one-word descriptors. And while there's a one-sentence description of what these things are in Chapter 4, kind of as a reminder or as a prompt, here's where the full write-up, a one-paragraph write-up and a one-sentence description of how it connects to your willpower. And there are quite a few choices drawn from all the different Wraith products produced over time. And there's some really stellar art. There's one in particular that I like, of a ghostly figure on a dark highway. Looks like it's standing in headlights, but quite cool. Then, once we're finished with that, with the personality aspects or the personality traits, we then move into the attributes. This is where they're going to be fully explained exactly what they tie to, and they will give you a 1 to 5 rating and a suggestion of specialties. So this is common across all World of Darkness games. This has always been quite good, quite easy to show people and say, here, create your character. What do you really want to be able to do? And it also sets them up for the trade-offs that they're going to have to make. What do you want to be able to do, and what are you willing to sacrifice to be able to do it? Which is an excellent part of character creation. Once through the attributes, then you get into what can your character do. We've got talents, skills, and knowledges to choose from. And talents, these are things that anybody with practice should be able to do. Skills are things that you need to be taught, but in a pinch, someone could do without any training. And then knowledge is, you either know it or you don't. And it's interesting to think of how you came to have these skills, how interested you are in maintaining them, developing them, that sort of thing, how important they are to what it is that you do. One nice trait that has appeared in this particular listing of the skills is at the end of each set, at the end of talents, at the end of skills, and at the end of knowledges, they also have some suggested other things that might be important. Now, we talked earlier in the rules chapter about how to interpret things, how to interpret the dice rolls, and how to interpret what it is that you're actually asking for. To really and truly understand that, to internalize that, reading this chapter is how you do that. Every single talent and skill, every single attribute is listed and it's rated from 1 to 5. So, do I need, as the storyteller, to call for a roll? Well, if you internalize this 1 to 5 flow, you'll know exactly when you shouldn't be calling for a roll, because they can just do that thing. This is where you find out what they can just do. So, for example, investigation. Right? An investigation of 1 is described as being a student. This is someone who has seen a few police procedurals. Right? So you're familiar with some things. It might help you in some cases. Right? In terms of when they should roll, if they're investigating something, that's most of the time, unless this is a commonly encountered problem from television. Right? 2 dots in investigation, college. You understand basic police investigative procedure. This is something you've received some actual specific training in, and you know how to do. So if this is a routine case, a routine process, the storyteller should really consider not asking for a roll. Just keep things moving. Right? Now, we're not talking about the number of dice in the dice pool. We're talking about the rating for the actual skill. This is or knowledge or talent. This is something that you can do. 3, masters. You could have been an insurance investigator, right? This is a pretty broad level of ability, right? Step-by-step investigation. Given enough time, you should be able to do the thing without requiring a roll. Now, this is a very, very important thing to internalize and make part of your World of Darkness gaming. There's an awful lot of bleakness. There can be a lot of opportunity for crushing failure. If you include things like botches, things can get really, really challenging and interesting. And we're already playing with pretty dark themes. But the characters are created according to specific concepts and imagery. They have lived lives. They've had specific jobs, training, experiences, and they're able to investigate and figure things out. It's not roll for everything. It's roll when important. And it's very important to understand when a roll is necessary, and this is how to get there. Another important point that is put here in the traits chapter is a sidebar called the language of the dead. This is all set aside in its own box. And it talks about how all the dead everywhere understand each other always, including in written language. Now, we've already discussed how Wraith society is generally considered to be text poor. Only the upper echelons may be having access to something remotely like ink or the ability to write things down permanently to save records. But at the same time, the language of the dead is one single language. And to keep that from being too overwhelming, they remind us that across the Shroud, in the Skinlands, language is still language. Right? It doesn't matter that all the dead can speak with each other. Being able to speak with and understand the people on the other side of the Shroud is an entirely different thing. Human languages are still a mystery, and I like that detail quite a bit. Then, what else do we find? We find the list of all the backgrounds, all the different connections or hooks or things from which a Wraith can build. Things like allies and having an artifact manifest with you, or having access to a haunt, a place that is more amenable to Wraiths being there. Eidolon, a measure of protection against the shadow, and so on and so forth. These are background elements that give your Wraith character an edge. Then it moves into the special powers of the Wraiths, the Arcanoi, right? Now, these are the special province of the guilds, and this was an area with which I had difficulty in the game when it was originally produced, because we have the guilds, and the guilds are responsible for teaching these things, and the guilds are now broken and living in secret, so to progress as a Wraith and to be able to accomplish a lot of the goals that they have requires having these special supernatural abilities, these arcane arts. But figuring out how to make them accessible yet controlled in a chronicle has been historically something of a challenge. This has been cleaned up significantly and shows the benefit of all the years of play we've had. Separating things into common arts, things that might be circulated out there among them, and initiate arts, things that are still protected by the guilds. This allows people to develop their characters. It allows them to establish teacher and mentor relationships in a variety of different contexts, and learning different skills which are very useful and marketable, and you're able to exchange in order to help different members of your circle accomplish their goals, yet at the same time preserve the mystery and the separateness and the value of being a member of one of these disbanded and disallowed guilds. It's an excellent touch, and I was really, really happy to see it, as well as the very specific advice given for how to set up these mentor-student relationships, even among peers. So very well done in that regard. Then that talks about different ways that these skills, these Arcanoi might appear. Talk about the development of guild marks, what it's like to actually wield these powers, and a reminder that at this stage, like if you're just going through this chapter in order to try and figure out how to build a character, you may have made decisions before this point which are suboptimal, and you might want to adjust them so that your character can actually do routinely what they're supposed to be able to do routinely. And it may read to some like advice to min-max, but it's really just a heads up that these supernatural powers are going to use some of your abilities, and you didn't know that until now, and it's okay to make some changes if necessary. The rest of this particular chapter goes through the different guilds in order, with all the lists of their common and initiate arts. This chapter ends on page 219 before moving into chapter 6, The Shadow. And it's pretty fantastic for me to have all of these different guilds and all of their common and initiate abilities all compiled all in one place. It is going to make playing this game and planning the game and making suggestions about the game and being able to say no to certain things and say yes, and encouraging people to try new things a whole lot easier. The broad spectrum of everything that Wraith is now presented in front of us, this kind of ashen gray rainbow of opportunity and choice. But I'm really liking this compiled, connected display of what Wraith has to offer. There are some weird things. There's an awful lot of different supernatural abilities listed, and not all of them are in here without errata, and that's unfortunate. But these are things that you can, with a little bit of patience, look at, understand, and play through. Having all of this together is certainly a balancing factor, and while we would love it all to be perfect, it can't always be. When it's an error like a copy and paste error, that's a little frustrating and disappointing, but they're few and far between. So, chapter 5, Traits, another positive, uplifting, and inspiring chapter. Soon, we go the other way when we hit the shadow, but maybe it will be inspiring in a different way.